Hi everyone, and thanks for joining this session. We'll be having an interesting thought around how to leverage process discovery to kickstart the process excellence journey in the new normal of this pandemic. And just to introduce the speakers, so I'm Shrikant Dev. I head the product management for a product called Assistedge, and I'm joined by Satish Nayak, who is the Vice President and Head of New Business in Infosys BPM. And we both represent the Infosys organization and also the Edgework, which is the subsidiary of Infosys. So we'll get started into this session. So this session for the next 20-25 minutes, myself and Satish, we will cover primarily the two aspects. One around what is process discovery, because obviously that's the key part of our discussion today. But more importantly, how can enterprises leverage this new sort of shining technology that's out there to primarily drive the process excellence journey, and that too in these times, which are very interesting, very challenging, but at the same time, which have also opened up a lot of opportunities. So how can enterprises use and leverage this technology to drive the process excellence? And we will actually get down into an actual case study of how one of our Edgeworth and Infosys client actually started their process excellence journey in this new normal, right in the middle of this new normal, using this process discovery technology. So it's going to be an interesting session. We would love to get your feedback, your questions around it, so that we can make it more interactive. Okay. So let me just start with what is process discovery, defining process discovery, and how can enterprises leverage it. So before we get into process discovery, even before the pandemic and all the impact that it has had, the disruptions that it has had, enterprises always needed process insights. They always wanted to know how to objectively assess how their business processes are doing. How can we identify the process fragmentation? That is, how can we know what are the gaps and variations in the existing process? How do we identify automation and other transformation opportunities? How can we continuous monitor and optimize processes? So all those insights were always needed by enterprises, but all of this have suddenly got a huge shift because of this pandemic. And the reason why it has gone shift is because the way of working has significantly changed. Okay. Many of you would have seen the huge impact in the operational side where people were forced to work from home, people were forced to work remotely. They had to adapt to this new normal. But even in this situation, it was very critical for businesses to maintain their business processes and continue the operations around it. So obviously they wanted to understand how this is all going. Now, traditionally, process mining has been primarily used to understand how the high-level processes have been sort of been taken shape in the organization. But process mining has also been used primarily to drive transformation. Okay? But process mining had two key sort of limitations as a technology. One being that it primarily relied on enterprise application logs, which meant that any activities that were done on those enterprise apps is what was available in the process mining insights. The other was that process mining taught at process insights at a fairly high level. Okay, you would typically say that okay, you can optimize a certain process or you can potentially automate a certain part of the process, but you wouldn't know which part, and you wouldn't definitely get down to the kind of level granular details that are usually required to actually take up those automation opportunities, and which is where process discovery has come up as a new area. In fact, Edgeworth and Assistedge, the product that we represent, we were the pioneer to coin this term process discovery a couple of years back. And in fact, exactly in this event, OPEX in 2019, when we actually launched the first ever process discovery product, which was the assisted discovery. So process mining and process discovery together now can really drive the process excellence and provide significant insights and opportunities around efficiency, automation, compliance, and process knowledge and training. So what is process discovery anyways? Process discovery essentially provides a very granular task level insights around the processes, which can then be sort of visualized in the form of interactive maps. And we are not talking about process maps here. We are actually talking about granular task level maps, where individually the actual execution of or the human system interaction has been captured as a single node. And that combination provides the multiple variation in the maps around the task execution. Process discovery and specifically assisted discover also provides a lot of dashboards around the task and the process at an overall level. And some of the interesting insights that usually come out of these dashboards are about what applications are being used, where the users are spending most of their time, where potentially the bottlenecks exist in the processes, and how automation can help in solving those bottlenecks. To further help any organization in taking these automations forward, assisted discover also provides a very clear automation blueprint, which then helps not only in streamlining and qualification of the tasks that can be taken up for automation, but it can even help prioritize and actually build a business case for automation. And finally, Discover also provides a PDD, or the process design document, which is at a control level and hence providing automation design and provisioning directly to the typically the automation center of excellence. So overall, how customers benefit from these technologies and how it can supplement and complement process mining is that it actually fills the exact gaps that process mining has. Okay. So one, it goes much beyond the enterprise applications and it can capture data across any kind of applications and technologies. And second, it actually fills up the detail level gap that process mining leaves out, which is about the task level insights and the task level understanding, which can complete the story of an end-to-end process when you combine this with process mining. And hence the customers are really interested in these combinations because it's now giving them some real actionable insights around the processes that they can easily convert into excellence initiatives. So how does it work? It basically works in 3 steps. First is capturing the data. So by data, what we mean is we capture the user system interactions. So every time a user interacts with any application through its mouse clicks or through the keyboard events, we capture every such event and then we convert that into empirical data. But in order to collate the data from multiple users, aggregate and help in analysis, we have an advanced AI engine, which is essentially a data mining algorithm that uses this empirical data to create actionable process insights. And I already talked about what those visualizations are. So one is the task maps, which is essentially a step-by-step view of how the task is executed. It also has a lot of dashboards providing multiple findings and insights. And finally, specific for automation, we have an automation blueprint, which provides the priority matrix of the tasks that can be automated. So with this, what we will now move on to is to see how one of our clients has actually used the process discovery as part of their process excellence initiative. So I will hand it over to Satish to take this forward. Satish?
Thanks, Shrikant. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to folks around the world. The example that we took in the case study that we wanted to share today was keeping in mind the situation we are in today. This case study was created right in the middle of the pandemic through a completely remote exercise. Right, this was for a global, CPG player, right, spread out across countries. Right, it had all the hallmarks of what people look for when they look at process transformation. Right, there was a requirement to standardize processes, wanting to understand what's really happening when a globally distributed process evolves over time. Right, these were executed locally across different geographies. Right, there was a huge need for driving efficiency, and driving efficiency not just through an automation standpoint, but truly understanding the business process, understanding the variations in the business process, understanding what can be done from process changes, what can be done from automation, what can be done from enhancing the underlying system landscape, right? And also to look at how do we really, once you standardize, is there a potential opportunity to drive efficiencies further through centralization? Right now, to add to the complexity of the situation, you had a very limited time frame to be able to execute it in a completely remote manner, where you had to literally interview about 50 odd different users, and more importantly, look at data gathered from these 50 users, both from understanding of the high level process and the process discovery, where the SSH Discover tool was actually getting driven. Right. This again happened across countries and across different ways of how this organization actually evolved over time. Now, the second dimension of what actually the reason why we picked up this was, I saw the question online. It's about, how do we look at, is it really applicable for true back office processes, for areas where there is front office, back office interactions happening, completely disaggregated in processes, right? For example, the cash collections process, right? There are country level variations, right? But a much more evolved back office process. But you also had on the other side route settlement and billing process, which had its own set of challenges depending on business nuances in each of these countries. For example, route settlement is how do you really look at reconciliation and settlements for a distribution run that actually happens in this space. So it was focused on the order to cash cycle, right, where we looked at cash collections, and part of that is route settlement and billing itself. Right. Now, if you just go to the next slide, Shikhar, if you can just slide. Now, if you look at within each of these processes, right? If I look at the steps that were taken across these six processes, there are 3,500 recordings that actually get done, right? And it's amazing. Manually, it's impossible for you to identify these variations that happened across different processes and across different countries. Let me give you a very, very simple example, and we just sometimes take it for in some granted, right? There was this initial part of the collections process, which meant generation of the overdue invoice mails. Now, you would assume that different people have a standard process in terms of the way they would run it. But just a simple task of that nature, or a sub process of that nature on overdue invoice mail generation, right, had about 6 different variations, right? And the nature of variations that got captured was, do you really send emails on the open items direct to customers and interact with them? Or is it that you do a check for disputes before you send out a mail, right? Or is there somebody else who's taking on saying, yes, I'm going to do all of these various checks and then send out communication and start interacting with customers. Now, the start process itself was so varied, and that is what I think the real advantage that we saw as we looked at this complexity, the spread of users that we're talking about across each of these 50 users. And obviously, the second part of the challenge becomes even more interesting. Now that you've gathered this huge amount of recordings from each of these places, right? And you also have a huge amount of data that comes in through these interviews and high level understanding of the business process, how does truly AI and machine learning really play a role in starting to cluster these different variations provided to the business analyst to take the next step in terms of what needs to optimize, what needs to get optimized, get the findings, get to the root of findings that have been gathered through all of these recordings. Now, let me just, if I were to just take a step back, the same kind of process, if you had to do it manually, first of all, you would never ever have identified all the variations in this process. Second, even if you had looked at identifying these variations, it would have probably taken you the next 3 months to sit and number one, gather the information, but more importantly also to start making sense of this information. What today the Discover tool actually does is, one, accelerates the whole time to value in some sense of getting the information, leveraging AI to start clustering and extracting information from what is available, and obviously present it back to the business analysts and the subject matter experts in terms of all of these variations for you to take multiple decisions that's coming out of it, right? And these decisions could be n-type, right? I mean, for example, in this particular case, it meant that there were decisions to be taken on which process do you standardize it, or do you need to even standardize it at all, right? Obviously, this would mean a deeper understanding of the business in those specific, the business nuances in those specific area. Second, does it, once you've identified it, standardized it, does it really need to get automated? Is it a human issue? Is it a training issue, right? Because you will find as you do these clustering, the outliers of what people really want to follow, where are training gaps. So it impacts the people dimension of it, right? Impacts the training, it impacts the adherence to a certain process, it impacts the process dimension of it in terms of understanding, standardizing, harmonizing these processes, and even to get bare visibility into what these processes look like. It impacts the technology dimension of it, be it in changes in the underlying systems and variations that have creeped up over time, or in terms of automation that you can actually drive in these areas, and ability to bring together all of these levers to solve a specific problem, right? We need to look at, right? Just some sample numbers, and the good part about using a toolkit like this is your ability to visually see these variations, right? To understand these variations and to be able to run these workshops to drive it. Okay, now if you can just move to the next slide. So if you look at the total number of, there were, and remember, all of this happened in weeks time rather than months, right? We identified about 74 different process improvement recommendations. Right now, these recommendations were at task level, at process level, at sub process level improvements. For example, when you look at submission of your route data, and if you're looking really at the route settlement information itself, we realize that people in most times were using the exception as the norm, and the main process itself was probably used a lot more lesser. Then you start double clicking into why is that exception there at all, and see if that needs to get incorporated into the overall process itself, right? And these few weeks of work meant that you're saving about, so the ROI multiples of using these kind of toolkits are huge, right? And by the way, just extending this into other areas of processes to actually collate, right? Now imagine for people looking at and experts trying to figure out where does those savings come from. It's obviously a huge leg up, and the speed and accuracy to which you can accelerate the whole identification part, right, becomes a lot more accelerated. In this case, about 65,000 man hours. But remember, in most carriers, I think the industry has matured to execution. Identification of ideas is a huge gap, and I think it clearly comes out. And at a tactical level, which are the automation recommendations that actually come out of it. So you will find visibility, you'll find the areas of efficiency, the effectiveness of each of these processes that you can drive. And interestingly, one outcome of this was, how do you impact the experience of those truck drivers in the route process, the reconciliation of that makes their life also a lot easier, right? So that's what actually came out of this exercise that we did for this FMCG major. Okay. Will we? I saw the questions that had come in initially. Shiva, I trust that answers some of the real life examples that we've seen, right? Be it from right simple processes like invoice mail generation to much more complex process changes, like what happens in a route settlement kind of a process. Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Satish. I will take up the next one. So next one, just for the benefit of everyone, I will read out. It says, looking at this tool, the map seems spaghetti. Is there a way to keep them clean, looking and following BPMN and ABPMP guidelines? Absolutely. I think it's a very valid point, Steve. So we do expose these maps as in a format that can be very easily converted into BPMN format and can be imported back into BPM tools. But more importantly, even within the assisted discover, we have a very different ways in which the user can handle this map. So you can visually, you can look at one variation at a time, all multiple variations. You can actually choose, pick and choose the variations that you really want to analyze, and that way it becomes very easy to handle. You can always export these as documents. Suppose you want to work on them offline, and plus you can also even edit these maps. So typically what we have seen in practice is that sometimes some of the manual actions which are not really directly related to the systems, they are not captured by this tool, but you can come back and edit the map to say that, okay, this is where I took this decision and hence it went into a different path. So there are variety of ways in which this maps can be experienced within the tool itself. But then if you want to further analyze it outside of it, yes, you can definitely export it in variety of ways. One of them is also BPMN. I think maybe the next one is for you, Satish. How do employees feel about what might be considered micromanagement? Do we have to win them over?
Very good question, Peter. Now, I'm going to talk about three different areas that we saw as we started implementing these across different engagements. The first and foremost is you need to be absolutely transparent and clear on the objective of why we are doing what we are doing, right? For example, in this particular process, right, it was made upfront clear saying, hey, listen, today we have a very, very manually heavy process. It creates a lot of pain, typically most of the times, in the employees running the process itself, right? I think sometimes we tend to forget that people don't necessarily like doing some of these really painful tasks and going back and forth around it. So I think being that transparency is absolutely important, right? The second part, I think, becomes a little more involved in some sense, right? Because if you look at defining the objective, you also need to make them involved into what you're actually doing, right? There is a thinking sometimes among a lot of specialists that we know everything and we will tell you what to do. But this suddenly provides you with a completely different opportunities for the employees themselves to be part of this experience, because you're seeing the variations that are coming out. I mean, it is sometimes it's funny, right? I mean, you're waiting for these maps to come out and you're showing them, hey, listen, you are doing this. By the way, do you know there are three other people doing completely different things? Because for them, it's also a way of learning, right? It's to see those variations. It's to see how are different people really handling some of these processes, right? How they're really handling some of these challenges, right? And as soon as you start involving them, that level of collaboration among those teams to come out with ideas to, and that brings me to the third part, involve them as part of the outcome. And trust me, there is nothing like that, because the enthusiasm that you see when you make them part of, hey, listen, we've seen this, this is what, they have good laughs sometimes, but this is what individuals are doing. And by the way, together you guys have come up with a very different dimension and direction of what this whole discovery exercise meant, right? So please make sure that we are transparent with them, right? Involve them as part of the process and let them collaborate, and more importantly, right, let them work on that outcome with you, right? And then I'm not saying that they will be involved in technical design of some RPA that gets done, or technical changes that, but just to be involved with the outcome that is coming out of all of this. And the good part here is you can see it happen, right? You don't have to wait for 6 months to say, hey, listen, this is what has happened, right? You can literally see it as the process progresses itself, right, and to see those deviations. Trust that helps.
Thanks, Satish. Yeah, thank you. Maybe the last one also you can take up, Satish. How did the processes change due to pandemic, and how did you track the changes?
I think in this particular case, for the lack of a better term, we were a bit lucky, right? We started the process during the pandemic, right? And we did this whole outcome, including, by the way, the downstream implementation part of it during the pandemic itself, right? So how did the process change? I think number one, it obviously meant that there is a lot of explanation training that happens in some sense a remote forum, right? What we would do earlier is pull key individuals into clusters, walk them through it, sit down, understand, train. But it meant that we had to create a very different training module, both for capturing, right, and for collaborating, and how do we actually come up with those responses. I think that change management, and I think it's critical. But then I think as a community and as a world, I think we figured out how to do change management pretty easily. I guess everyone's managed that, right? So that is one big change. The second part of the change was, on the ongoing collaboration piece, because you suddenly have situations where people are remote and you're coming up with these ideas, collaboration. How do you really guide and facilitate an online workshop mode to come up with all of these ideas? Now, if I have to consolidate, the good part is I think that's where the technology really plays a role, is in the recordings, being able to apply AI to be able to cluster and things and extract that information. But you still need to finally take decisions. And I think it was an interesting one where you have these remote teams sitting and working on the final outcome in a remote manner.
Thanks, Satish. That was quite useful. And just to add on what top of what Satish said, while yes, I mean, of course, in this particular example, the processes did not change. But yeah, I mean, there is a common sort of anxiety in many of our clients that they would want to know how the processes are, whether they are the same or whether they have changed because of this whole work from home, VPN, and all those setup related complexities that they have had due to the pandemic. In fact, some of the work that we are doing right now with Assisted Discover with our clients is actually to help customers understand the processes and how they are being executed. In fact, as we speak, there is one project that we are doing with a Japanese plant, one of the largest manufacturing plant in Japan, where they are actually deploying this product across many of their work from home employees to understand some of the processes and how they are being executed before they can even decide whether it needs any change or whether it needs any further improvement. Okay, so that's another interesting use cases that are coming because of these situations nowadays. Okay, so I think we are at the end of the questions and at the end of our the time also. So thanks a lot for everyone for joining the webinar. And just to conclude, I would say that I would encourage all of you to actually try out this Assisted Discover product. We have made it very, very easy with a simple download, with a simple trial version that you can download and try it yourself. That's available on our website. It is www.edgeverve, which is edgeverve.com/assisted. And you will find all the information about Discover as well as how you try out our trial version there. So I would encourage all of you to do that. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.